My uncle claimed my dying father promised him the house, the savings, and full control over the estate, but he didn't know the in-home caregiver had been quietly documenting everything for months. My dad, Robert, had been diagnosed with ALS 2 years before he passed. The progression was slow at first, then brutally fast. He went from walking with a cane to needing a wheelchair, then a feeding tube, and eventually assistance with almost everything. Through all of it, he stayed mentally sharp. That mattered to him more than anything. He used to joke that as long as his mind worked, he was still himself. I lived about an hour away and visited every weekend, sometimes more. My brother Evan lived across the country and came when he could, which Dad understood. What surprised me was how involved my uncle Mark suddenly became. Mark was my dad's younger brother. Growing up, they'd never been close. Mark was charming, loud, always chasing some business idea that never quite worked out. He borrowed money often and repaid it rarely. Dad loved him in the way you love family by default, but he never trusted him with anything serious. So when Mark started coming by the house multiple times a week after the diagnosis, it felt off. At first, I told myself I was being cynical. Maybe this was his way of stepping up. He brought groceries, fixed a broken step, and talked endlessly about memories from their childhood. Dad seemed happy to have company, and I didn't want to question kindness where it might genuinely exist. As the disease progressed, we hired an in-home caregiver named Lena. She was in her early 40s, professional, quiet, and meticulous. She kept detailed notes about medications, mobility changes, and Dad's speech patterns. She had this calm presence that immediately put us at ease. Mark loved Lena, not in a creepy way, but in a way that felt strategic. He was overly friendly, constantly asking her questions about Dad's condition, his mental clarity, what days were better than others. Lena always answered in careful, clinical terms. About 6 months before Dad died, Mark started staying later. I'd arrive after work and find him already there, sitting at the kitchen table with Dad, papers spread out between them. "What's all this?" I asked once. "Just organizing things," Mark said casually. "Your dad asked me to help him get his affairs in order." Dad looked uncomfortable. He didn't contradict Mark, but he didn't confirm it either. Later that night, when Mark left, I asked Dad directly. "I already have a will," Dad said. "You know that. It's with my attorney." "So why is Mark doing paperwork?" Dad sighed. "He worries. He thinks lawyers complicate things." That sounded exactly like Mark. Over the next few weeks, I noticed changes. Mark began referring to the house as the family place and talking about how much work he'd put into maintaining it. He'd mention how stressful it was worrying about Dad's care expenses and how someone needed to be practical about finances. Then Lena pulled me aside one afternoon. "I want to be clear," she said carefully. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but I think you should know I've noticed some concerning behavior." She explained that Mark often asked to be alone with Dad during times when Dad was most fatigued. He discouraged Lena from staying in the room, saying family conversations were private. Lena also noticed Mark prompting Dad with leading questions. Things like, "You don't want the house tied up in probate, right?" Or, "You always said family should keep property in the bloodline." Lena started writing more detailed notes after that. 3 months before Dad passed, his speech deteriorated significantly. He could still communicate, but slowly, with effort. His hand shook constantly. That's when Mark showed up with documents. He claimed they were simplified estate forms that would save everyone time and money. I found him in Dad's bedroom, holding a pen and guiding Dad's hand toward a clipboard. I intervened immediately. "What are you doing?" Mark jumped like he'd been caught stealing. "Relax. Dad wanted to make a few adjustments." Dad looked exhausted and confused. When I asked him if he wanted to sign anything, he shook his head slightly. I told Mark to leave. After that, things escalated fast. Mark began telling extended family that Dad had changed his mind about the will. He implied that Evan and I were distant, that we only showed up when it was convenient. He stopped hiding his resentment. When Dad passed away quietly one morning with Lena and me in the room, Mark didn't cry. He immediately started asking about paperwork. The will was read a week later. It was straightforward. Dad's assets were to be split equally between Evan and me. The house was to be sold. Mark was left a modest cash bequest. Mark lost it. He stormed out of the lawyer's office and 2 days later filed a claim contesting the will. He produced a handwritten document dated 10 days before Dad's death. It claimed Dad had left the house, savings, and control of the estate to Mark in gratitude for his devotion. The signature was shaky, unsteady. Mark said that was because Dad was weak. The lawyer told us not to panic, but the process would take time. During that time, Mark moved into the house. He said he was protecting it. He changed the locks. When I tried to enter, he called the police and told them I was trespassing. The officer said it was a civil dispute and advised us to let the court handle it. Mark stopped answering my calls. That's when Lena contacted me again. "I think it's time you see everything," she said. She invited me to her apartment and laid out months of documentation, daily logs, time-stamped notes, and then she opened a folder labeled Personal. Inside were photographs. One showed Mark practicing my father's signature on a legal pad, over and over again. Another showed the same distinctive loop in the capital letters that appeared on the contested will. Lena explained that she'd started documenting after witnessing Mark trying to isolate Dad repeatedly. "I've worked in home care for 15 years, she said. This pattern is always the same." At the hearing, Mark's confidence evaporated quickly. The judge asked him to explain the signature practice pages. Mark claimed he was helping Dad exercise his hand. The handwriting expert testified next. He showed enlarged images comparing Dad's authentic signatures to the forged one. The differences were obvious. When the judge asked Mark why the forged signature matched his practice attempts exactly, Mark couldn't answer. The caregiver's logs were admitted into evidence. Every day Mark claimed Dad was clear and decisive, Lena's notes showed heavy sedation, confusion, and inability to communicate. The judge ruled the handwritten will fraudulent. Mark was ordered to vacate the house and referred for criminal investigation. Outside the courtroom, I felt nothing but exhaustion. The criminal case ended in a plea deal: forgery, attempted fraud, probation, and restitution. The house was sold. Before we closed, Evan and I walked through it one last time. It felt empty but peaceful, like it finally belonged to memory instead of conflict. A month later, I met Lena for coffee and thanked her properly. Without her quiet diligence, Mark might have succeeded. She said she didn't do it for recognition. "People at the end of life deserve protection," she said, "especially from those who see opportunity instead of humanity." That sentence stayed with me. Grief teaches you many things. One of them is that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes wrapped in familiarity, smiling and calling itself family. But truth has a way of surviving, especially when someone cares enough to write it down.